Hi everybody, welcome to our first lecture. Today we will provide an overview of ancient Americas. Something to keep in mind is that we are not looking at every culture of the American continent. We are only looking at a few. The reason for discussing these cultures is that they are all materially wealthy and had highly developed economic, political, and social structures. Just a quick reminder that the best way to contact me is via email. You see my email address on the screen, and you will find it on my syllabus and class webpage. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with this image. When you look at this image, what does it remind you of? What type of culture might this be from? What region of the world? I often find that students' first reaction is that it is from Asia. Let's take a look at the reasons for this. 1. If we look at the head, we find the appearance calls out to many people something Asian. Something about the eyes and the beard seem like Asian features. Secondly, if we look at the clothing or lack of it, it seems like a sumo wrestler. Talking about the name wrestler, when this was found by archaeologists, they essentially did some of the things that we just did and named it the wrestler. This is not an indication of its actual function, but simply a way of distinguishing it from other artifacts. By the way, the word artifact refers to an object made by humans that is of cultural or historical interest. Let's take a look at another side of this image. These drawings show the front and back of the wrestler. These drawings were made by archaeologists. They are made to be scientific observations of the artwork. Please take a look at the soft undulations of the skin that covers the muscle. Especially look at the shoulders and the back. They look very realistic, very natural. Based on this, we can start making some initial judgments about their society. We notice that they had particular talent in depicting the human form, and they must have had some type of tradition in supporting artists to give them time to practice the form so they could reach this level of expertise. Who were these people? The Olmec. The name Olmec comes from ancient Aztec society, so this is not a name that we know these people used for themselves. Olmec, among the Aztecs, meant the rubber people. The Olmec come from a time period dated to be approximately between 1500 and 800 BCE. By the way, the term BCE is meant to replace the previous term BC. BC means before Christ. BCE seeks to remove the religious orientation and means before the Common Era. So when does the Common Era start? Same date as before, with the birth of Christ. If we're talking about the contemporary time periods, we would be ACE, after the Common Era. But getting back to the Olmec, the Aztecs referred to these people as the rubber people because they came from an area rich in natural rubber. The Olmec took natural rubber and constructed a ball used in an ancient form of competition that we simply call the ball game. The ball game, again, is a descriptive term we use today. We do not know what the ceremony was called in ancient times, but we do know that this ceremony was practiced throughout the Americas from the northern part of South America through Mesoamerica to what is today the southwestern United States. There's a lot of speculation of the meaning of the ceremony. Some argue that at the end of the ceremony, either the winning or the losing team would be sacrificed. I mentioned the word Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is a scientific way of saying Middle America. Let's take a look at where the Olmec were from. In this map, we see a city named La Venta, which was one of the major Olmec cities. Notice that La Venta is on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. This location provided a very good set of resources. It was at the end of a series of rivers that provided lots of water. Beyond that, the location provided opportunities to trade up and down the coastline via boat. This strategic location allowed the Olmec to reach a high level of economic development. Here we have another example of Olmec artwork. These sculptures are referred to as the colossal heads. These two pieces of artwork came from an excavation site called San Lorenzo. These are very large sculptures. The one on the right is approximately 8 to 10 feet tall and weighs about 10 tons. This artwork took a tremendous amount of labor and skill to carve. If you look at the headdress of each of these sculptures, you will notice that they are slightly different. Archaeologists believe these are representations of different lines of authority, perhaps different kings. In addition to lines of authority, we can see some other interesting features in these sculptures. Let's compare the colossal heads to the wrestler, which I noted seems to have an Asian appearance. When I ask students about these sculptures, again without telling them where they come from, many say they look African. So were the Olmec Asians? Were they Africans? We will look into this further when we talk about immigration to the Americas. But for right now, I would like to focus on the material that was used. These sculptures were carved from basalt. Basalt is a volcanic rock. The nearest deposits of basalt for the Olmec were approximately 100 miles away. So to haul huge pieces of stone to do this artwork took a tremendous amount of organization and labor. In addition to social organization, I would like to introduce appropriation. Appropriation is something we will discuss many times during the term. It means taking the power of something and giving it to yourself. Let's connect appropriation and volcanic rock. Mesoamerica has a tremendous amount of volcanic activity. It was very common for people to see eruptions, lava flows, and also see the lava that was bright red and flowing, cool and harden into stone. Now think in terms of human blood. When it flows from humans, it is bright, red, and warm. But as it cools, it hardens and turns brownish black. Some archaeologists have argued that carving in basalt is a ceremonial act of carving in the blood of the earth. By carving in basalt, the Olmec may have taken the concept of appropriation and given themselves the power of the earth, because they carved from the blood of the earth. As noted earlier, we'll return to appropriation, but right now, let's take a look at something else. In this slide, we have a different image of the Olmec. This is a ceramic from the same time period we have been talking about. But instead of colossal, this is small, perhaps 18 inches tall. And as we saw in the wrestler, this has a tremendous amount of nuance and detail showing the ability of the Olmec to render the human form. Again, take a look at the softness and undulation of the skin. This person is a little bit chubby, which probably means something in itself. But for right now, let's focus on the head. If we consider that most parts of the head are rendered well, why does this head have such a strange shape? It is an exaggeration. It is believed that the Olmec, as many cultures then and now, practiced body manipulation. In this case, when the child was an infant, they wrapped the skull very tightly in order to shape it. Okay, moving on from the Olmec, let's take a quick look at another set of cultures. Here we have the map of Mesoamerica once again. Let's move a few hundred miles to the north. This is an area referred to as Teotihuacan. Let's take a look at another location. Moving east and north, we see a city called Chichen Itza. Let's start with Teotihuacan. The dates for Teotihuacan are from about 100 to 600 ACE, so we can see that this is several hundred years after the end of the Olmec. Teotihuacan has a number of prominent features. Here, we have a mountain called Cerro Gordo. The structure closest to Cerro Gordo is called the Pyramid of the Moon. A second structure, quite a bit larger, is the Pyramid of the Sun. The long avenue from the Pyramid of the Moon towards us is referred to as the Avenue of the Dead. The open area to the right is a marketplace. There is evidence of lots of cultures from many different Mesoamerican nations, all having districts in this trading area. Some have speculated that Teotihuacan was some type of international ceremonial and trade center. At its height, the city may have had 200,000 residents, It was the largest city of the Americas until Mexico City in the 1780s and then New York in the 1820s. Let's take a look at another image. This building is in a city called Chichen Itza. It comes from a period quite a bit later than Teotihuacan, and we can see we have moved again quite a long way from the time period of the Olmec. Chichen Itza is dated from about 800 to 1200 ACE. The structure we are looking at served as a celestial observatory. Chichen Itza is a city that mixed the cultures of a group known as the Itza with another, more famous culture called the Maya. In Chichen Itza, we see many of the traits of the Maya, especially attention to mathematical calculations in relationship to celestial movements. Celestial movements can be thought of as a natural calendar. Calendars are extremely important. We may forget this because they are so common today. But what calendars allow us to do is plan and predict what is going to happen in the near and far future. Many people and many cultures made celestial observations. Societies who study the sky know the stars and planets appear at regular intervals. These societies calculate the amount of time between different skies and relate them to the seasons. These observations allowed societies to predict what was going to happen in the future. In addition to predicting the future, the regularity of celestial cycles allowed societies to trace their past. Like the Olmec, we see societies that had a tremendous amount of labor available to them that allowed them to build these structures, but also enough wealth to support expert individuals who could dedicate the time to specialized events. We have been looking at Mesoamerica. Now I would like to move further north into the territories that will become the United States. This map outlines environmental and subsistence regions. In this map, we find distinct environments, but also areas that have different forms of subsistence. In other words, making a living. The areas in light green have societies that practice intense agriculture. We see that Mesoamerican cultures had this practice, but so did others. The first cultural group to take a look at here is Cahokia, which is located near what is today St. Louis, Missouri. Cahokia is dated from 1750 to 1350 ACE. If we take a look at the image below, what we find is a regional ceremonial center. This center has a series of pyramids, but they are distinct from those we saw in Mesoamerica, as well as those in Egypt that come to a sharp point at the top. Here we have multiple levels and a housing structure at the top of each. It is believed that these were the residence of leaders in the community. The bigger the pyramid, the more prominent the leader. If we look at the people in the plaza, we get a sense of the size of these structures. The large pyramid at the top has a base that is larger than any pyramid in the world, although it is not as tall, nor does it have as much mass. Cahokia was the center of a thriving economic and political region sitting along the Mississippi River. Here's another image of Cahokia. This is an archaeological map created by the National Geographic Society. It provides a good picture of the city plan. One thing that is particularly important is the defensive walls around the central pyramid district. These are referred to as palisades. We can also see various creeks, ponds, and lakes that surround the city. Cahokia was not directly at the bank of the Mississippi River because it floods annually. Cahokia was the largest city of North America until Philadelphia surpassed it at the beginning of the 1800s. It is believed that it had a population of about 20,000 people. It is not nearly as big as Teotihuacan, but still a very large complex. Let's take a look at another city. This is a Coosa village that was in what is today Georgia. The time period for this community is 1350 to 1500 ACE. These dates overlap with the dates that Europeans first arrived in the Americas. but there is no historical record showing direct contact between these cultures. Nevertheless, there was indirect contact. People who encountered Europeans did interact with the Kusa community. European diseases appear to have afflicted this community and may have been part of the decline and disappearance of this culture. In this artist's rendition, there are some important things to take a look at. At the very front, we see palisades, a defensive wall. We also see a series of permanent buildings. And in the background, once again, we see pyramids. This is another example of pyramid building societies throughout the southeast of what is today the United States. These cultures are seldom covered in U.S. history. Nevertheless, what we see is that these areas had many independent nations with tremendous amounts of economic activity and political complexity. But most of these communities had declined and disappeared by the time Europeans entered the region. For now, we're going to close the lecture. Okay, we'll see you in class.